Good day, everyone. Good day, everyone. Greetings from Trinidad and Tobago. I'm going to take this off because I am socially separated. My name is Wayne Williams. I am the Executive Director of the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association. With us this morning, we have a lot of distinguished speakers. I want to thank Mia Water, Alma Water Solutions, Smart Water Magazine for help co-organizing this webinar. I know you will enjoy it. I am speaking from Trinidad and Tobago. We have speakers from Grenada, Spain, and a lot of European countries. So we already have a lot of people logged in from all over the world. So we're very excited to bring this to you today. The pandemic has shifted many paradigms. It is no longer business as usual. There are many downsides to this situation, but because humans are resilient, we are beginning to see some new upsides developing. We are adapting. Well, let's get to it, shall we? We have a packed 2-hour program with some distinguished speakers. There will be a question and answer session at the end. I would like to let you know how you can send in your questions. We have 3 different ways. Either via YouTube, you log on to YouTube, go to the Smart Water Magazine IAGWA site, and there's a COVID-19 that you just click on the title, and it'll take you straight to this webinar, and it'll take you straight to be able to ask questions. We also have on Slido, sli.do, that's sli.do, Slido, and you can use the hashtag COVID-19 Caribbean Water. That's COVID-19, hashtag COVID-19 Caribbean Water. You can also send your questions on Twitter via the same hashtag, hashtag COVID-19, that's 19, COVID-19 Caribbean Water, CARIBBEAN, water. And also just a reminder, anybody logged in, please switch off your microphones unless you are speaking. I would like to introduce our first speaker this morning, our first presenter, Mr. Stuart Hamilton. Those of us know Stuart, we know he is everywhere, except today, he's not everywhere. He is home. He's the chair of the International Water Association, the Water Loss Specialist Group. So please welcome Mr. Stuart Hamilton.
Good morning. I'm Stuart Hamilton. I'm based in the UK, and currently I am chair of the Water Loss Specialist Group. Today I'm just going to be talking about what's happening around the world to do with NRW and how certain countries are coping with the pandemic. First of all, let's start in the UK, is where I'm based. The UK, basically, all non-essential staff are working from home. This is where they're all being sent to work, where they can log on for remote activities, such as looking at flows, pressure data, flow data, and anything they need to look at which comes through the internet. We have currently probably about 2,000 technicians working in the UK on a daily basis. Most of these are contractors. And because of we class leakage as a very high issue in the UK, these people are still currently working, and they work as a sole person in a van. So it's individual there. They have all the equipment, and to spread the issues of meeting in the offices, we actually changed all their shift patterns, and all their leaks are transmitted back and forth. Flow data is transmitted back and forth using the internet. So there's very little meetings of people. Then if we go on to Portugal, Portugal have done much the same. They've followed their guidelines from their health department, and all non-essential staff are again working from home, but they are letting their NRW teams on their NRW departments to carry out general emergency type work. So meters that go down, pressure reducing valves that falter, telemetry systems that are affected, they can go out and look at. And at the same time, if they have any leakage or any high problems of high usage, high demand, they can go out and at the same time look at that loss or that situation, and then they can call out the emergency teams to come and fix the problem. Australia, much the same. Data is transmitted to the technicians all working from home on a daily basis, and that data is sent to them with GIS plans, information that comes into them on emergency work, and it lets them continue all the work and continue doing what they're going to do from the home basis. And as emergencies come through, they can go out there and solve these emergency problems. China, very little change in China for the people. They've always worked out in emergency fields, and they still continue to work the same. The benefit they have in China is when they're working in the Beijings, the Shanghais, and all the major cities, is because they were very populated with vehicles and people. This pandemic, with the streets being empty and locked down, is enabling all these people to stay indoors and allows the leakage technicians to be able to go out there and find leaks and solve problems that they wouldn't necessarily solve. They wouldn't necessarily be able to fix because of the people being about. So they've actually benefited quite well out of this, where they can get to go into areas and locate valves and do problems where they wouldn't normally get to. Now, the Philippines, water engineers are not essential workers. So they're not allowed out. They have to stay indoors. They don't do anything. If PRVs or pressure valves or DMAs or burst mains occur, they are left to continue to run. They're spending time doing reports and planning and seeing what they can do to solve the problem in the future, but they are not classed as emergency personnel. So it's a bit of an issue there. Some of the projects in the Philippines are performance-related pay. So these people, these contractors, are having to leave their areas which they've spent 6 months, 12 months reducing, and just watch the levels rise again, and there's nothing they can do. They are considering looking for compensation of some sort from the water company, but that is something for the future. Saudi Arabia, we know Saudi Arabia would be very strict on their curfew, and on their curfew they have put in place definitely from 3 p.m. to 6 a.m. every day. Now, in Saudi Arabia, they do have intermittent supplies, so it's not so critical to them to be not working at these times. But during the areas where they are putting water out, they are looking at consumption patterns so they can understand just some areas, what's happening during this pandemic. And they're looking to share that data as well with all of us, which is great. Greece, water considers essential. So in reality, nothing has changed. They're working the same, they're in the field the same. They continue to do all the operations, and like everybody, they're always doing social distancing. They never change from social distancing. Malaysia, same as the Philippines, non-essential work. Stay at home, leave the leaks running. Do not go out unless it's an absolute emergency burst. Nobody is doing anything within the NRW field, leaving the whole situation to be recovered when they go back out, which in fact was yesterday. They could start to move again. But in the joining countries of Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and I believe Singapore, they could go out. So you can see how some countries treat it differently to others for what they're going to do. But when we look at all of this, what's the most common? What do we have in common? The common is they all social distance and work safe. Most people work alone. But what we can do now, which we couldn't do 10 years ago, is communicate remotely via cloud, internet, laptop, webinar, PCs, communications, telephones, Zoom, YouTube. This has enabled us to change the way we work today, and potentially we should look at what we've benefited from this situation to look at in the future, because we've not, some areas are doing very well working from home. So we need to look at these and learn from the experience and get the benefits. So let's look at what else has been impacted in the world and the Caribbean. Many countries are giving grants, loans, hard cash to what we could now call furloughed staff. In the UK, we give 80% of the salary up to the first £2,500 per month. So that means if you earn £2,500 per month, $3,000 US, the government will give you 80% of that money to the person. In the USA, if you earn less than $75,000 US a year, you will get a check, and you have received a check for $1,200 US. This apparently is free money to the individuals, and the companies in certain circumstances do not have to pay this money back. Now, what's happening in the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, South America? Are you being given money? Has money been donated to you? So this is what I don't know. But if you've not been given money, how are you going to pay bills? How would you pay your water bills? How would you pay your electricity bills? Now, scenarios are the water electricity companies cannot disconnect supplies during the pandemic. And even in some circumstances, we're reconnecting supplies that have been previously disconnected for bad payment. So this is something to think about. Now, if we just quickly look at your income in the Caribbean, oil, petrochemical, gas. Oil price has plummeted. No money in oil anymore. The Middle East are stopping or trying to prevent any capital works of infrastructure in any of the utilities being paid for by the government. They are now looking for private investors to complete any of these works. So that's what's happening there. And in your countries as well, in the Caribbean, oil, petrochemicals, gas, not much money there. Minerals, agriculture, they can move between islands, possibly, for agriculture, but not a lot being exported. Hotels, cruise liners, tourism, your major impact, all been stopped. And it's all been stopped now for 6 weeks, 8 weeks. So now let's look at what happens there then. Now what's going to happen? Meter readings can be done if AMR is introduced. And AMI is a superb thing to do. And we must promote this everywhere in the world, because it's the carrier it can do is fantastic. The ability to move data is great from the field to the office. But does this mean they will pay the bills? Probably not. They're getting no money. They don't have money. Food comes first, water comes second or third or fourth. Desalination plants are still pumping water. They want payment. They need 100% payment. They cannot afford to slow down on payment or give some sort of benefit back to the water company. They want that money. So now, how does this affect the water company revenue? If you're in debt as a company, does this lack of funds that will come to you from your customers put you further into debt? That's one question. Another question is, can the government subsidise you in 2021, 2020, 2022, and forth, because they have no revenues from taxes, they have no tourist tax being paid, they have no hotel taxes being paid, and the governments are really being hurt to the extent the US are going to look at a 6% economy downturn in this year. If we're looking at Europe, 7% downturn, and if we look at Japan, a 5% downturn. If we look at Europe, $1.5 to $2 trillion is expected to be required to loan the countries to get out the mess. And in the US, they're saying several $1 trillion. So, as a water company, what you got? Does this mean you can stop a rehabilitation program? Now, if you stop rehabilitation program, do we go to an intermittent supply regime? Do we go backwards? Do we reduce NRW by going backwards? No, we don't. We have to keep going forward. We have to go forward because we can make the company vulnerable to the next COVID, to the next pandemic. Now, never before in our lifetimes have we ever seen a pandemic anywhere in the world such as this. Are we going to see another one? I don't know. But we do need to use this to prepare ourselves. And we prepare ourselves through water, through NRW reduction, and all the other elements within the water company. So this isn't just for the Caribbean, this is worldwide. This is what we look at in the Water Loss Specialist Group as a worldwide issue. So what are the solutions? Now it's time to start to think outside the box. No longer what was the norm is the norm to go forward. We need to be thinking outside the box of what is different. How can we get somewhere? A PPP, is that the answer? Some sort of hybrid agreement of a PPP. Some different format of funding, which I don't know about. It's there. Performance-based contract. Fantastic, move forward, brilliant, work very well. But do you need to use your money or just use private finance? Outsource all the NRW type work. Outsource your rehabilitation. Where you cannot afford to do it internally because you do not have the money or the funding available. Like concessions. The dirty word concessions in many countries. But you know, this may now be the time. It may be the time to start to think, how can I solve my water company problems? Does it mean I have to go to a concession? But put things in there such as, we can buy the concession back in 5 years' time. We have first options available. You can put many things in, but look to the future, look to the forward, because we can't stand still. We cannot move backwards. We have done so much work to get the worldwide NRW to such a good level. We need a long way to go, but we cannot stop. And we as the Water Loss Specialist Group, push to get it going. Now we're going to have some accelerated stimulus of some sort. Let's award projects. Let's get out there and give projects to people. Let's find an alternative way of funding them. But you know what the biggest problem? Stop the bureaucracy. Don't wait 2 years to give an award and then find a reason why you can't give it. The solution isn't going to come by waiting 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years to give an award. If you're going to do it, getting there, do it, be brave, be smart, be educated, but main thing is you've got to move forward, because around the world we are not going to solve this water shortage problem or intermittent supply problem or NRW problem if we sit back and just wait. And that's me finished. I thank you for your time, and over to Wayne. So thank you very much indeed.
got to unmute. Thank you, Stuart. Excellent stuff. And I agree with everything you said. And there's too much bureaucracy, but people are becoming innovative now, and we're looking at all the different options that are presenting, the new options that are presenting themselves. So looking forward to that. Water loss is a big subject for most water utilities, and here in the Caribbean, it's very large. Water has done some good work in Bahamas. I know in Jamaica, I think possibly even won an award, right? So, so we're looking forward to greater work in NRW in the Caribbean and working together. Let me take it right on to the next speaker, Mr. Noam Comey, Chief Growth Officer at Water, and he's going to talk about efficiency as a key component in resiliency. So, thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good morning in the Caribbean. Good afternoon in Europe. My name is Noam. Happy to be with you, and thank you very much for taking the time to watch this webinar. Hopefully, it's going to be interesting for you. First of all, I want to say a general statement. I think that as coming from an industry as water and sanitation, which has a long history, almost as long as humanity, we should look also back what happened in last pandemics and how they affected the water and sanitation industry. And actually, if you look back and you see what generated modern water and sanitation in the largest, most important cities in the world, like Paris or London, it was the cholera pandemic that generated actually a huge change towards a better world in terms of water supply and wastewater treatment, etc., etc. So not all is negative. This is my first thing, and I hope that I can demonstrate that we can do some interesting things at these difficult times. So I'll just start with the presentation, and I'll repeat a bit some things, and so I'll go through them very, very fast. I think the significant, I would like to start with the main challenges that I see in the Caribbean. I don't live in the Caribbean, but I've been working with the Caribbean for many years. It's, let's say, a second home for us. So we are worried about the general macroeconomical impact of COVID-19 on economies that are dependent mostly on tourism. If you would see on this chart, you can see that, for example, Bahamas, 56% of employment is people working in tourism, 30% in Jamaica, 40% in Barbados, 10%, which is also a huge amount in Trinidad and Tobago. So this is going to create a huge stress economically on the economies of the Caribbean, as island economies dependent on tourism. And this is what we need to deal with. In addition, in general, Caribbean utilities are in a difficult place to begin with. Okay, not all of them, but a lot of them are stressed financially and operationally. And as this is an essential service, and this is a time that we can actually show to our governments, to our stakeholders, including our clients, how actually important is a water system. Hand washing is the cheapest, most reliable way to deal with the spread of COVID and other illnesses. Water supply 24/7 is not a luxury, is a must, okay? And the challenge increases because of consumption reduction, which is 5-7%, I would say in average globally, but can be much worse in the Caribbean, again, because of specific economical measures and situations, and political measures such as freezing tariff increases or avoiding disconnections. Also, we will have less government funds available due to the economical conditions. what I want to say here, I think the main message from this is, first of all, as water professionals, this is actually, in a way, an opportunity for us to show that our employees, our companies are heroes. They're like the guys that go to the hospital to treat people, or the police. There are guys going out to the field to make sure you have water to wash your hands. So we actually can generate more respect to our industry, more value in terms of social value and perceived value. What I would like to say about the political measure, which is absolutely understandable under the context, I just want to say one thing. I don't think water utilities are the right organizations and the right entities to be the ones that take the social role in society. I don't think a water company is the best way to distribute wealth. You have tax, you have welfare, you have other systems that you should support the people that are poor and that cannot pay for water, but it doesn't need to fall, from at least from my perception, on the shoulders of a water utility that is dealing with a huge crisis in any case. So you don't want to add to that crisis. The social security, services are much more proficient in giving money to needy people than a water company is proficient with dealing with reduction of tariff for specific individuals. We have less tools, and we're not. It shouldn't come on the, let's say, on expense of the water companies, because they are an essential part of the economy, and they are an essential part of fighting this pandemic. So these are the challenges that I see. Some good news. Water is probably one of the least affected industries and sectors in the world. And even in comparison to other utilities, if you compare water to electricity, for example, the reduction in electricity supply is much sharper than water supply, which makes water more and more attractive. Why? Because it is a rigid consumption utility. Imagine comparing water utility to any other infra asset that we're talking about. Most infra assets are exposed to some extent, at least, to consumption. In water, this is much more rigid, much more manageable. And because the water service is usually the cheapest utility that people consume, we think that it makes the attractiveness of water utilities even stronger than before. Because if you compare it now to a toll road or to a electricity utility, a water utility is more resilient, more attractive for financiers and for other people wanting to get involved in this business. I think that one thing that we learn is that reliance on local staff, training and knowledge transfer, which was always important for us. You can see that most of the places we operate, we have almost 100% local staff. Is becoming more and more and more important in today's world. I think the idea that some projects, the concepts that some projects include of massive replacement of manpower, bringing a lot of expats in, is false in this world that we live in today. With travel restrictions, etc., we must be able to train the local. There are many, of course, beyond Corona, there are many advantages to that, but we need to rely and we need to focus on local workforce and local capabilities and build them strongly. So even a small economy can have the resilience to deal with their own issues without being dependent on the outside. I think that some operation aspects will be more digitalized and will start being pushed stronger and stronger. Something such a shock to the system, I would say, to the general economical system, always accelerates trends. And I think that one trend that is accelerating around the world is more remote operations and better digital process of the commercial processes that we have. So I think that water utilities from this experience of Corona will make sure to learn, and I hope that they will do that, how much you can improve your, on the one side, your operation as a utility, your efficiency, your water losses, both physical or commercial, and how you can improve the customer relationship if you introduce some technology and digital processes to that. There is actually, in most of the world today, no need for a person to actually walk into an office to pay a bill or to deal with an invoice. I would say that even in relatively poor countries, the access of 3G, 4G smartphones is enormous. So the vast majority of the population can access services remotely, and that can improve the results of water utilities. And that is very important in the road to becoming a more resilient water utility. The basis of efficiency is absolutely non-revenue water, especially in the Caribbean. If you don't have your non-revenue water issues solved, the rest is like trying to install very high-end software into a system of a very old car. If you take the navigation system of a Mercedes and you put it into a car you bought in 1985, it's not going to change anything. It's going to be the same car with a fancy dashboard. So first, before we plug the technology in, and of course this is something that you can do in parallel, we need to work on the basic, and the basic is to have sufficient water supply. I won't go into the full details of that because I guess Roland will speak about that a bit in further detail after this. But just to highlight, this is very possible. We've done that in many places in the world. The possibility to reduce massively non-revenue water and save costs and increase inflows of cash for the water utility is there. Financing, at least in the Caribbean, is there. There is I would say, an appetite, both from the Inter-American Development Bank and other development banks in the region to finance. But even in cases that does not exist, I think that we have the obligation to try to create alternatives for that. I'm going to skip a bit the details of the non-revenue water process and lead you to a subject that is a lesser known enemy, I would say, which is commercial efficiency. Commercial efficiency is a very simple concept. It's how much money you're able to put in your pocket from the operations of your water utility. And I have to say, this is not cynical in any way, and this is not unique to a private water utility. All water utilities, if they do not control their commercial system well, they lose a huge amount of money. And that money, in turn, is not available to be invested in the water system, in the actual physical network. That deteriorates. And then it is a vicious cycle that is very hard to get out of. So one of the basic holes that we need to plug is not only the holes in the actual water network, it's the holes in our wallet, in the company's wallets that leak money. If we don't complete this aspect of the business, if we don't treat it in a professional manner, we can lose a huge amount of actual cash, because people a lot of times talk in revenue terms, but then you can see many utilities that have huge issues with collections of the invoices. So it's nice that you invoice and you invoice correctly, but you need the money in the bank. And governments, I hope, will understand that a resilient water company is a water company that has sufficient profitability to deal with crises. This is something that we need to convey always, and I'm not talking only about politicians, to the population, the value of the service and why this service has to be something that can survive financial and economical shocks. The main principles of modernizing the commercial system are available already. you can outsource the commercial department, you can bring private sector financing to this, and you can modernize your full water meter park to a remote ultrasonic meter. This is all available. The thing is how to tailor make it per utility, but it's highly possible. This is the message. Again, I will not, in the considering time, I will not go into every aspect of how you can improve your commercial processes, but essentially, we know how to do that. The private sector knows how to. I'm not talking only about MIA. In general, the private sector knows how to treat these issues and knows how to make sure that you pay only when you have a suitable return on your investment, and that's a key aspect of that. How to finance improvement, and with that I will try to wrap up the issue. Projects are very hard to finance in general. Short-term projects are very unattractive for financing entities. Why? They're complex for banks to analyze. They don't understand them. The cash flow security level is low unless there is an international organization that is, providing the money. And it's very hard for banks to understand how can they step into the project if something goes wrong. An infra asset, a long-term infra asset, is something that you can finance easily and relatively cheaply. To do that, you have to have some things. You have to have suitable tariff, a suitable guarantee. You have to have the contractor assume responsibility on these aspects. But what is a bit of a, I would say, no, it's not a paradox, but it's just a thing that is really happening in the world today. You have governments having less and less money to deploy in water and wastewater. The financing gap is increased, and private money is cheaper than ever. This is something that people need to also take into consideration. We are in an all-time low of cheap money. The interest rates all over the world are very low, and they are not going to jump anytime soon, which means this is an opportunity to finance cheaply. Like, it's a good time to take a mortgage when the interest rates are low. It's the same. Fixed income players do not have pension funds, etc. They do not have the old ways to make money, and infra is very, very attractive to them. So you can actually, everyone that manages, owns a water utility, it is a good time to see how they can improve that water utility with relatively very cheap money from the private sector or from IFIs, of course. But I think it's almost unprecedented time in history to do that. So hope we will take advantage of that situation, and with all the sadness and the disaster that we're experiencing, to see also a ray of light and hope that we will evolve as an industry from this situation. And as I know, the Caribbean islands, they are amongst the most resilient people in the world. They go through natural disasters, unfortunately, quite often. And I'm sure nothing, including COVID-19, will break their spirits. So I'm going to be very positive, and I think that the Caribbean water sector will flourish in the near future, hopefully. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noam. Thank you very much. While Noam unshares his screen and Chris Husbands is coming up, I just want to let you all remind you the 3 different ways you can send in your questions. You can send it in via YouTube. Go to the Smart Water IAGUA site. See the COVID-19 and just click on it. It'll get you right in. The Slido or the Slido, depending how you pronounce it, SLI.do. You could use the hashtag COVID-19 Caribbean Water. That's COVID-19 Caribbean with 2 B's water. Or you can also send your questions via Twitter with the same hashtag, hashtag COVID-19 Caribbean Water. So without further ado, I want to welcome our next speaker from the island of Grenada in the Caribbean. He's Mr. Christopher Husbands. He's the general manager of NAWASA, which is the National Water and Sewage Authority of Grenada. He has several hats because he's also the president of CAWASA, one of our sister associations, as you can see there on the top, Caribbean Water and Sewage Association. So without further ado, let me welcome Mr. Chris Husbands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and greetings to all persons in different parts of the world, different time zones. So I can't say morning because it's afternoon and evening for some. And let me start by thanking NOM for that vote of confidence in the Caribbean water sector and the resilience of the Caribbean people. We tend to share that opinion, and we hope certainly that we'll demonstrate it this time. Just in terms of orientation, and this is also to remind persons where we are so that you can keep us in mind and hope to visit the region as soon as possible. This is the Caribbean here. I'm speaking to you from Grenada down at the bottom here. I'm the president of CAWASA, an organization of basically 12 utilities in 11 countries along, generally more on the Eastern Caribbean, but we also include Cayman Islands over here. CWWA, Wayne is the president of CWWA, the executive director, sorry, and of course, a wider membership of professionals. The CAWASA, quickly, as I said, we represent 12 utilities, 11 of the countries: Antigua, Barbuda, Barbados, British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, Dominica, Grenada, Montserrat, St. Kitts, Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Turks and Caicos. So this is an association of utilities, not individual professional members. The region, as and Stuart almost could have completed the Caribbean perspective, because what applies to the rest of the world and the challenges that we expect were adequately covered by Stuart in the beginning. At the broader level, you have the Caribbean community, the heads of government. They have been meeting and looking at ways of engaging the international financial institutions on matters related to debt restructuring, debt forgiveness, stimulus packages, etc. So it's being handled. The challenges for the region are being handled at the CARICOM level. If I drill on a little bit, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, for those of you not familiar, we have a common currency among the countries of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. That doesn't include Barbados, it doesn't include Jamaica, it doesn't include Trinidad. Those have their own central banks and their own currencies. The ECCU, of which Grenada and most of the CAWASA countries are members, we're expecting a 5 to 7% decline in real terms. We were initially projected to grow by 3.3% at the beginning of the year. Tourism accounts for up to 90% of some of the islands. And a lot of the member governments have announced a form of stimulus package. When I see the package as offered in the UK and the US, what Stuart put up there, I certainly can tell you what is being floated is fractions of that, and for obvious reasons: affordability, capacity, reality, etc. So while the concept of stimulus packages is the same, the ability to assist is certainly significantly limited compared to what some of the more developed countries are able to do. What's happening with COVID? Well, the water utilities generally have to continue to operate. We're exempt from a lot of the emergency curfews, etc., because the service has to continue. Some aspects of the services are curtailed, and they're curtailed in part because the movement in the rest of the country is curtailed. So in the Grenada context, we put a hold on things like new connections and ancillary services, but your mains, your treatment, we put a stop on the projects, but generally the organization has to continue. As was mentioned, the region is taking a significant hit in the tourism sector. Basically, all the hotels are closed. No flows, no revenues. Offshore universities are affected. In the Grenada context, our offshore university accounts for in the region of 25% of our GDP. That again is a major hit, and all the spin-off businesses that are operating as a result of that major investment. The restaurants are closed. Now you have an increase in residential flows. Persons are home. You know, we were saying informally here that we're having 7 Sundays. Sundays is normally the day when everybody's at home in our culture, doing all their house chores. Water demand is highest. In a sense, everybody's home every day. They're looking for things to do. They're washing things that they haven't washed in a year. So we're seeing that usage pattern becoming a challenge. The online payments are minimal. Most persons have not caught on to that technology yet. I'll speak to that a little bit later on. We have, we've all, a lot of us have suspended disconnection activities, and that is a political consideration. The reality in this time is that, you know, there has to be preservation of life and livelihood. And certainly, I don't think persons will really be prudent to be disconnecting supplies, certainly in the peak of this. It of course brings to the fore the strategy for getting your revenue and your cash flow back on track. That is what the management of the utilities have to do. We've expended significantly in procurement of safety supplies, you know, masks, sanitizers, all part of the new culture. Increased operational costs, the truckage of water. I'll speak to the seasonality soon. And as I said, we've suspended major projects. The climate. You know, right now, we normally every year have tourists, and we have 2 challenges with the climate, which are not going to go away because of COVID. So COVID is superimposed for us on top of our normal annual challenges. The first challenge is the usual part, the dry season. So as I said earlier on, you know, there's increased trucking now because we're in the midst of the dry season. Some islands have serious shortfalls. The Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology suggests that for this next quarter, there will be reduced water availability due to a persistent long-term drought. Some islands are affected differently. Jamaica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, expected to, as of April 1st, is moderate. Shorter-term drought is evolving more on the Western Caribbean, and that is the other thing. You know, sometimes you have different weather patterns, sub-patterns emerging between Western Caribbean, Eastern Caribbean, Northern Caribbean, Southern Caribbean. According to CIMH, long-term drought is of immediate concern. ABC Islands, Barbados, Trinidad, and some of the Windward Islands. And the overall implications are that the transition from the dry to the wet season may end up hotter and wetter than normal in some cases. The part 2, because we have a switch, so we go January, basically, well, December to May, we look up in the sky and we're praying for rain, dry season. From June, we look up to the sky and we're praying for not too much rain, because then we go to hurricane season. So at no point in time is the Caribbean ever in a relaxed state of mind when considering the climate and our water utility. The predictions for this year are that we're going to have an above normal hurricane activity. 18 named storms, 9 hurricanes, 4 major hurricanes. That, unfortunately, is going to be devastating for any island that is affected, and the entire region is going to feel it once any island or islands are affected. So that is a serious risk for us from a water supply standpoint, of course, for the region as a whole, but for the water utility standpoints, it's something that we certainly have to try our best to plan and to reduce the impact of. You know, we were hit here in Grenada very hard in 2004. Our pain was eased by the help we got from everyone, starting the day after. It's difficult to imagine getting hit now and your help being limited because everybody is under pressure at the same time. We just have to pray and hope that we go through the part 2 without major challenges. But as a serious issue for us from a water supply standpoint. Looking ahead, it's not business as usual. You know, as you said, the economic implications are now starting to sink in. The tourism industry is not likely to rebound for this year at all. So each month, the reality of the situation gets clearer, the implications get clearer, and the economic damage seems to get deeper. The ideas to stimulate the economy are there. As I said, the governments are working, the countries are working, and the ability to keep some of our revenues going is going to be directly related to how these stimulus packages are rolled out, the extent to which the economies can be supported, and the extent to which people can have basic income for basic needs, including paying their water supply. We have to start looking at more automated functions. Certainly, it's a time for us to really reevaluate and accelerate our IT investments, our IT platform, our IT backbone, SCADA, AMR, AMI, the work order systems. It's clearly a time for us to look at those urgently needed technological investments that are going to improve our efficiency and certainly allow us to operate within the social distancing protocols, which are likely to be around in some form or another for a few months. Renewable energy options, we certainly have to look at those. Those of us that are net importers of energy, at least that is maybe one bright spark. The cost of energy has gone down significantly. So that certainly is going to at least give us one little help. I know for some of the countries like Trinidad and Guyana, and so that export energy, it's not a help for them, but that's what it's yin and the yang, right? That's the balancing. We have to identify alternative supply of treatment chemicals. We've been having some issues with the supply chains being interrupted, the shipping. So these are all things that we are grappling with and redefining and realigning and sort of setting new directions on at the moment. We, of course, are working with the Ministry of Finance and the Development Bank on short, medium, and long-term plans. I know the Caribbean Development Bank is trying to organize, or not trying to, they're organizing a webinar like something like this for, I think it's next week, where the region's water sector can speak to the financial institutions, look at implications, look at areas of intervention, look at areas of assistance, etc. So this is all unfolding. It's all unfolding in real time. And I think we have to work day by day to adjust and move forward as the picture becomes clearer. Area of technology, as I said, we have to be prepared to facilitate more processes. Now, you know, there's one little bright spot. That picture that you're seeing there was actually taken maybe 15 minutes ago. And it's encouraging that in light of the challenges, people are still turning out to pay their water bills. This we didn't expect. This is a lineup to pay water bills right outside my office now. We actually have to be consistently trying to manage the crowd and tell people to social distance. Now, of course, as with our structures, with many other structures, your domestic rates are significantly less than your commercial rates. So while we have a good response, and it's really commendable that people within their limited time, I mean, I don't know if it's that they're just trying to get out of the house and they're looking for things to do. So they have such limited options that coming and paying a bill is a chance to get out and feel normal again, but we'll accept that and be happy for it. But I could tell you, these lines have been going for the last week. You know, of course, we have had to make adjustments internally to ensure that the staff are not at risk. We've had to build physical barriers to ensure that the staff, because you know you're trying to have a maximum number of cashiers on, so that at least you keep the line moving and not have a big lineup. But you can't have the cashiers being susceptible to contamination from each other and of course from the public. So we've built physical barriers that at least are there to protect the staff while dealing with this crowd. But as I said, the online bill payment process certainly is something we have to drive some more and get persons to use it more. And I think that is going to be a challenge for the entire region. But I am happy to report that at least persons are turning out to pay their water bills. We already have, and again, it's one of the things we have to drive, other ways for persons to pay bills, groceries, bank. You know, one of the things with this culture that I guess we still have to work on is people just like to have a receipt. So I can tell you, within that line you're seeing there are people with checks. We have been walking the lines every day, asking persons, if you have a check, just give us the check, we'll process it, and we'll mail the receipt. Persons are not coming out of the lines, but they're still turning up at the cashier with a check. Why? Because they want that piece of paper and they hand the receipt. So that is a cultural thing that has to be worked on, and it's all going to be part of the changes we're going to have to make going forward. Looking ahead, also, you know, the whole health and safety aspect of it has to be considered more seriously. There are additional costs attached to that. You know, how you position people, how many people can work at a time, the whole question of transport. You know, you could have sent a vehicle to transport 15 operators before. Now you can't have more than 5 in that vehicle, so you have to provide more transport to get the same number of operators that are needed, more cost. Water trucking certainly is one that is going to be with us, and especially for some of the islands that rely on it more in the dry season. To get away from that, we're going to have to make some capital investments in our distribution and transmission and distribution network. We must be prepared to work with the trade unions. I was actually on a call with my trade union just before starting this, looking at some aspects. And of course, we have to find a balance between what is ideal, what is possible, and what is fair in the circumstances. As I spoke of climate change before, the operational efficiencies, as I said, you know, and training and technology are key to operational efficiencies at this time. And it's something that we all are going to have to really redouble our efforts on. Preparedness, also with preparedness and response, but using technology to drive our operations is going to be a critical factor for us going forward. And of course, the protection of our utility workers is of paramount importance, those in the field, those in the office, because without a healthy workforce, we can't keep the supply going. And it's one of the things we've been paying quite a bit of attention to and trying to ensure that we are sort of on point with that. Those islands that have regulators have to work with their regulators when they got their rate structures in place, the assumptions, the conditions that were used as part of the business case, as part of the projections are going to be significantly different, and islands are going to have to go back and have discussions, make adjustments with their regulators to keep sustainable. We have to work with the governments to sort of get the stimulus packages going, make sure that the utility workers and their families are provided with help in certain areas that they need to keep the whole system working. And of course, NRW. Stuart spoke about the opportune time for NRW. That's correct, and I think it's one of the things that we all have to look at. So I thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions as they come up.
Thank you, Chris. And while Chris comes back out, yeah, wonderful, good stuff. And I will be presenting after, and Chris and I, we collaborated, so so many of the things that we talked about will be shared, because you know a lot of people unshare your screen there, Chris.
I did.
Oh, okay. All right. So as we are sorting that out, I will let me do what I do here. I'll share my screen. Yeah. And don't forget the ways of connecting. It's through YouTube. Go to Smart Water Magazine. Also to Slido, SLI.do. That we also have hashtag COVID-19 would be the app. COVID-19 Caribbean Water, I'm sorry, is the hashtag. Twitter, hashtag COVID-19 Caribbean Water as well. So I'm ready to go, Pedro. So I'm just waiting for my screen to show up. But this morning I'm going to talk about the waste utilities, impacts and responses, keying off of Christopher, who talked about the water utilities, and most water utilities in the Caribbean also responsible for wastewater. But we're going to take a look a little bit at the solid waste here. Let me start my timer, right? So who's the CWWA? Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association. There, and y'all will get the presentation after to be able to read this in detail, but we consider ourselves the preeminent association of professionals, practitioners for the water and waste sectors in the Caribbean. Over the last few years, we have taken aboard the waste practitioners. So we're actually, we have been incorporated by an act of parliament since 1991 in Trinidad and Tobago. We're looking to change our name to the Caribbean Water and Waste Association, but because it was a incorporation by an act of parliament, it's a little bit more of a drawn out process. But by all intents and purposes, we consider us the Caribbean Water and Waste Association. Our vision is to advance the science and practice of water supply, wastewater, and solid waste management, and to promote the efficient management utilities. Our membership, CAWASA's membership is a membership of the utilities. Our membership of the people. And that's the main difference between CAWASA and CWWA. And so we work together in the region to promote the water, wastewater, and waste sectors. Let me get right into it. I'll talk about CWWA after. Waste management and essential service. Well, I'm not going to read everything here because I know you guys can read, but the underlying thing, like what Chris said, is that the show must go on. Waste has to be collected. Waste has to be properly treated if it is, and disposed of properly. There's more demand for improved health and safety practices and procedures. Now, what's interesting with both wastewater and solid waste is that they're always infectious waste anyway in our environment. COVID-19 isn't the only one that is there. So sometimes what COVID-19 has done has been able to heighten our awareness of it. But a wastewater worker and a solid waste management worker have to be careful anyway, as we will see in a little bit. Pre-COVID, the utilities were stressed. You know, there's lack of money, there's HR issues, the government perhaps may not make it a priority, but just because of the calls they're going to get from private industry or politically what they need to do. But we have to be prepared and we have to respond. One of the things we talked about here, COVID-19 is a disaster, is an emergency, but as Chris alluded to, In the Caribbean, we have environmental emergencies, which look almost the same in certain ways. For example, you may have a worker that has contracted COVID-19 and cannot get to work, or his office is closed because there's a problem with the virus there. So he cannot get to work, let's say. Well, what's the difference with him not being able to come to work because of COVID-19, or if a hurricane hits and trees fall and block the road, he still can't get to work. So the office that he reports to sees the same thing, sees a worker that cannot get to work. Of course, there's some differences with a disease versus a natural disaster, but still, the water utility, the wastewater utility, the solid waste management utility will have to treat many of these emergencies the same way. And climate change is a big thing in the islands as well. Improvement of operational efficiencies is important. We need to train, we need technology. I heard Stuart talk about that. We need training, we need technology. Everything is not the same, and of course the workers must be protected. So look at some of the impact on the contractors. We'll start there. Garbage must be collected. Now in the countries, in the islands that we have, there's some islands that utilize private contractors to collect their waste. And most of the islands, it's the government agencies that collect it. But be that as it may, they have to go out there. And if you're a contractor, there's more demand for domestic waste collection as folks are staying home. As Chris said, you're staying home, you're eating more, as the big complaint, and you're using more water in his category. For waste collection, there's more garbage, there's more waste to be thrown out. However, so there's more waste, so therefore you could imagine if the truck is driving along and there's more waste, the trucks will get fuller quicker and may have to make more than one run in order to reach the end of the route. And so that's a challenge because they're being paid the same amount for the most part. Waste collectors are paid the same amount to collect waste whether the trucks get fuller quicker or not. And of course, the part supplies are closed. There's always employee challenges, some because of sickness. We talked about riding in the truck before. Maybe 3 guys could ride in a truck, and now they'd have to just reduce it to 2, or maybe somebody has to stay on the back of the truck longer than they should, hanging off the back, as we would say. So there are challenges. Of course, with COVID, as Chris talked about in the islands, less revenues from decreased rate payments. I was happy to see folks lining up in Grenada to pay their water rates. Not sure they're going to do that for waste rates. Of course, the biggest thing in most islands is no tourism income. I mean, no tourism income means hotels are closed, and now with the stay at home, the restaurants are closed. So for some of the waste haulers, there will be less waste because the hotels and the restaurants are not open. But the government is also collecting less money. And in collecting less money, they will have decreased national revenues. And of course, if they decrease national revenues, they have to put it in the more priority areas. And that isn't always to finance these sectors. Improvement of operation efficiencies becomes more paramount. We heard that a couple of times this morning. Most utility personnel at home, you have to stay at home. Protection of workers is critical. And major projects that were deemed non-essential, in fact, most major projects right now are on hold. So there are no revenue. So contractors may have been given a contract in order to do something, and now everything is put on hold, and that perhaps is the income they were looking for. And not only that, they may not be able to continue paying their workers, so they have to lay them off. And sometimes, and contractors do not like to do that because sometimes when you lay off somebody, they go and work for your competitor. Or when work starts back, they're not available for different reasons. Financial aspects, just like water and wastewater, the hotels are closed. There are no collections, but there are no revenues either. Same for the restaurants. Residential waste, increased volume with stay-at-home measures, but the revenues are the same because you're just getting paid to clear a route on different days. You don't get paid more when there's more garbage. Bill payments have decreased. Of course, we talked about the commercial offices being closed, less cash payments. There are people that like to pay cash. And as Chris said, I didn't even realize that many people want that receipt. It is in their hand. It is proof that they paid. And they have a lot of folks, many of our pensioners, I know here in Trinidad there was a discussion, the pensioners get their pension check and they cash it, and then they come with the cash to make the payment. So they're not necessarily looking to pay online. And the less payments from the elderly, that doesn't mean anything other than most of them like to pay cash and get a receipt. And then of course, those who are non-computer savvy would rather just go to the office, make the payment and get the receipt and go. Now, many of the sites, many of the utilities are looking at improving ways of making that process easier, which we'll look into that. Subventions, another impact, of course, subventions from the government has decreased. Increased health and safety costs, as Chris mentioned, masks, hand sanitizer, and a lot of these things may have been purchased under emergency mode, which makes the pricing, which tends to make the pricing a little hot. Waste management challenges, residential waste. Now here's an interesting challenge. Yeah, the more waste is generated by a stay at home, great. But you may have somebody sick at home and you don't know. Either it is in the early stages or they may be non-symptomatic. So you have the garbage men, the waste management personnel, picking up waste from homes that may be infectious. Now, what's interesting, as I mentioned before, is that COVID-19 isn't the only infectious waste that people have at home. So generally speaking, waste haulers should be careful anyway in collecting the waste. The challenge in one of the challenges is to be able to separate the waste. So if you have somebody that has been tested positively for an infectious waste in your home, be it COVID or any of the other infectious ones, there is no separate collection by the haulers for that. You know, we were in a Caribbean forum a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking that, you know, we should put it out in a separate bag and it should be collected separately. Nobody has the infrastructure to be able to do that. So what we have is that we have residential waste that may be infectious being disposed in the general areas of the landfill with the other waste because it's not identified. And the waste pickers of people, you know, individual entrepreneurs that will go through people's garbage as it comes into the landfill and separate it out for recycling, for reuse, to repurpose. And I know in Trinidad, you know, as you're driving in, it's kind of dramatic as they're driving in. They jump in the back of your truck and start pulling stuff out and throwing it so that they can get it first before anybody else. But that's a problem if some of that waste is infectious. Medical waste, a little easier to handle because it is assumed that hospitals and the quarantine locations have infectious waste. So that waste is collected separately in just about every island. Now, one of the challenges is that there are more infectious patients, so there are larger volumes for special disposal. So one of the items, if you don't have an autoclave, and some people still have incinerators, not great for the environment, but it is what it is to just make a separate control cell, dig a hole elsewhere, and bury that waste separately. And of course, in the best strategy is, of course, to fence it so that nobody can wander in there and take something out from there. One of the challenges that was raised by our people was that sometimes private hospitals and doctors' offices do not have special collection and disposal procedures. And that's the thing. You go to see a private doctor, you may be asymptomatic, or maybe not. Maybe you've started getting something, and whatever you use, you put into his trash, and his trash goes into the trash of the doctor's office, and it's infectious, but it's not identified. So that's one of the challenges they have. Health and safety, always. Safety procedures sometimes are inadequate, or they may be in place, but just over time, people get lackadaisical about it. So training needs to continue. Residential waste, some of the responses. Well, bury it immediately. Consider it all infectious if you're taking it from homes, just handle it carefully. COVID has heightened the safe collection disposal practices. Recycling and reuse has decreased to zero in some islands, just to keep it simple, because they're working possibly with less people. And maybe if the equipment is starting to break down and they can't repair it, they have less trucks. So they're just keeping it simple. Let's just get the garbage, let's get the trash, let's get the waste to the landfill and get it and bury it every day. No collection of bulky waste in some islands. That's complicating things. Keep your old washing machines, keep your old chairs. You know, we're just disposing of regular waste that needs to go. Medical waste handled separately where possible. Public hospitals, they already have arrangements in place. They probably have their own contractor, separate trucks, separate location for taking their waste. Some hospitals have their own autoclave and their own incinerator as well. Quarantine locations, of course, new arrangements would be made. There's some, you go to a fresh building that can hold a lot of beds, like you've seen in the news all over the world. And so the waste coming from there is looked at to be infectious. Private hospitals and doctors' offices, of course, you have to communicate the importance of separating their waste for disposal. And of course, we're talking about a separate controlled cell for burying if no autoclave or incinerator are available. Health and safety of workers. Many places have reduced staff on site, reduced office personnel. Some work remotely. The elderly and those that are at risk and non-essential workers, they're not necessarily the same. They're sent home. You don't want to keep the elderly there because they're high risk. And if you're trimming back down, if you're trimming operations, the non-essential workers sent home. Contract staff actually may be cut from the payroll or furloughed if it gets really bad. You have to ensure adequate PPE for workers while they're on the job, because they do have to come to work. Social distancing is in effect. Special training is and where required. Workers coming in will be screened daily for symptoms, sent home if there's any doubt. Waste pickers are not allowed on site, and thankfully in most sites they understand the seriousness of the situation, and they don't do that. Reduced collection days. Many of the sites have reduced the collection days. Reduces the chance of infection, and it reduces the number of employees required. So many of them have, like on the weekends, like you see here, decreased landfill hours and days of operations, no weekends. For many of them, sometimes it's only half day Saturday. So I just threw this slide in here that we won't talk about because you all will see it when you get the presentation. The Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association has worked with the IDB and several partner agencies to have a regional strategic action plan for the water sector in the Caribbean. And many of you guys will hear about this. We've started looking at the projects to be financed. So there is good news down the road for NRW, for a lot of projects that are required, climate resistant projects, renewable energy projects that will be coming down the pipe. So I want to thank you. My time is up here. These are the ways you can contact us. That's our website there, cwwa.net. Our Instagram. We are on all the social medias, but one of our hot ones is on Instagram, CWA Caribbean. It's the same for Facebook. And of course, our Gmail is CWATT, that's Trinidad and Tobago, CWATT secretariat@gmail.com. Myself and Anuradha Maharaj, Jagdip will receive your emails and any questions that you may have. So we're looking forward to working more with everybody. We consider 60% of what we do at CWA is advocacy. So if you want to know who, what, when, where in the Caribbean in water, wastewater, and waste, give us a call, send us an email, and we will help. Thank you very much. So moving right along, I want to introduce our next speaker. And don't forget that you can ask questions. I'm going to ask Aranzazu to start loading up. I've just referred the questions. of course, when you're in YouTube, you can ask the questions there. We have people monitoring them, and we'll post them to the site. Slido, SLI.do, hashtag COVID-19 Caribbean Water is the contact. And Twitter, hashtag COVID-19 Caribbean Water is contact as well. So you just send your questions, and at the end we're approaching the end, and we have 2 more speakers, and we will start addressing your questions. So I want to introduce Ms. Aranzazu Mencia Saita. She's the Vice President of Business Development for Alma Water Solutions. So I'm looking, just waiting for her to be loaded up. There we go.
Hi, thank you very much, Wayne. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Media Water, for the invitation to this webinar, and to all of you for spending this afternoon or this morning with us. I think through the session, several of the speakers have already spoke a lot about the topic I would like to present you. And it's more thinking a little bit in the future. Is okay, we are nowadays in this moment passing through this terrible pandemic, but one of the solutions that it has been put on the table today, it has been to look at PPP or BOT or private finance models in order to build new infrastructure or to improve the existing, being sure that the water is and it will always be a critical sector, and it has to be in a very good shape for overcome this pandemic or anything else that could come in the near future. So I would like to these are very basic concepts that for sure most of you already know, and there are several experience about PPP projects in the Caribbean. But just to summarize a little bit, there are several models for contracting. Most of them depends in the type of owner, if it's a public agency or private entity, the risk profile of the project, the owner's experience or their advisors with similar projects, and the source of the funding, if they are loans, grants, equity, multilateral. The most used through the region are either EPC, turnkey projects, or DBO, and BOT projects or PPP, in which the private sector is involved with the funding. What that means that the private developer is responsible for building, owning, and operating the facility for a long-term period. I think before Noah said that it would be better if it's beyond 10 years, the standard is 20-25 years. At the end of this period, the asset, the infrastructure, it may transfer back to the client or held by the developer or put a new contract in place. You can see there a very simple scheme that is mainly thought for infrastructure as water treatment plant, desalination, wastewater, but also it can be put for non-revenue water contracts and performance-based contracts, as we mentioned before in our presentation, that could be transferred in this type of a scheme. What are the 4 main characteristics of these projects, and why we think that in the last year the PPP is growing so much in the water sector? First is the population that is growing and is requesting quality in their services, in the water provided and in the wastewater to be collected. Of course, is the public entity, the government. In some of the countries in the Middle East started for an energy crisis that now we are seeing everywhere, a decrease in some of the incomes of these countries due to the low price in the fossil fuels. And something that nowadays we are suffering, and the previous speakers also mentioned, there will be budget constraints in the government. The budget that will be available should be there to go social policies and to fight against the COVID-19 impact. So with this limitation in the government budget constraints is where the new players have to come and to offer solutions. These new players are normally private companies with know-how, with the capability to manage the risk linked with this contract, and that can offer this innovation and this efficiency to improve the existing contracts or the new infrastructure. And of course, the financial sector, and it's something that Noah also said before. I think this is the time in the history that there is more liquidity in the market, and the investors actually looking eagerly for new opportunities where to invest the money. So the problem is not the money, the problem is the right projects, the right structures, and the right policies to invest the money. So the governments that are putting in place a framework, PPP laws, and a financial scheme that is attractive, is these governments are getting a huge interest from the private players with some very, very competitive rates that can make affordable some of the infrastructures that years ago were impossible. What is a key success for a PPP project? Of course, the full support from the government. It has to be a political willingness, and it has to be a long-term contract and a stability view and a framework that offers legal security and financial security to investors. Of course, the financing is a key factor, and some years ago we saw that the government support through government guarantees, it was the main way to do it. But nowadays there are also other mechanisms, as escrow accounts, as multilateral agencies being able to take in that country risk that could make this project more affordable for some of the countries without increasing their debt. The private sector must be involved in the process since the beginning. They have to be part of the consultancy. They have to put on the table their experience and the commitment to take the risk that they are able to handle. They have to secure the financing. And of course, they have to provide the flexibility to restructure the project during the operation phase, so all the parties could take benefit of any refinancing or any improvement in the capital market. And with all of this together, the BOT tariff or the PPP tariff could be, I will not say competitive, I will say a fair value. It's not always the cheapest, it's not always the better. Sometimes what it has to be is a balanced BOT tariff, that it has to be affordable for the country, affordable for the clients, and as always, it has to be a balance between the interests of the public sector and the private sector. As we have been discussing the whole afternoon, in my case, morning for most of you, the COVID-19 is generating delays, disruption, and a lot of uncertainty in the construction projects. Most of the companies are suffering travel restrictions. It's not possible to take account of the government personnel that were supervising the projects. And although most of the construction work is going on, the impact it will be very large. Most of the projects are nowadays requesting a force majeure on their contracts, on the long-term contracts, to be able to overcome the situation. Each project is different, and the consideration of the financing, the partnership of this force majeure has to be evaluated. But we reckon that, or at least in the project finance that we are executing all over the world, if the project finance is well defined and the contracts are balanced, it will be a very temporary situation that it shouldn't affect the long-term contracts. But what is very, very important for us, and I think that for everybody, water access is now more crucial than ever. And I think the first measure against the COVID-19 is to wash our hands. So for all of that, the provision of safe waters, sanitation, and hygienic condition is essential for the human health during this disease and during the future. For all of this, we reckon that we need to ensure that good and consistent apply water and waste management practice in all the communities, homes, school, marketplaces, everywhere, to prevent human transmission. So that's why the development of the water projects continued, especially in those regions suffering water shortages or any other water supply. And that's why we reckon the private sector can take nowadays the role to support the government to ensure that these projects will continue. And that's all from my side.
Great, thanks, Ip. Thank you very much. Wonderful. And, the PPP and the more liquidity in the market, as you were saying that, I was asking myself, well, I hope that stays. I hope that stays. It's very important. Thank you. Right projects, right support from the government, right framework, right repatriation policy. These things are important. And as you went to that slide, our friends at PAHO who works closely with us remind us that when you're washing your hands, turn off the tap. They're actually they either put out a video yesterday or soon will about that. You save about 70 to 80% of the water by doing that. Well, our next speaker here, many people know Roland Limburger. He is the international expert in NRW planning, and he has a very catchy title, After the Crisis is Before the Crisis. I'm looking forward to hearing from Roland as well. So Roland, take it away.
Well, thank you very much. It is a tough job to be the last speaker after all these excellent presentations. So I hope nobody is too bored, and I hope you guys will still listen to me. This time we were lucky, we have to say, because the COVID virus does not want to be in our drinking water. And there is also very low risk of transmission of the virus through the sewage systems. But in 2003, we had a very similar coronavirus, and it has been detected in untreated sewage for up to 14 days. But nobody knows what the next virus will be, what the next crisis might be. And maybe it's a virus that can be easily transmitted through the sewage system. Polluted groundwater could then go, if we have intermittent supply, into our water pipes. And then we switch on the supply and we perfectly transmit this virus to all our consumers. And this is what is really worrying me. We all know that intermittent supply has many disadvantages, but still it is common in most of water utilities in the world. Here I have some quotes from about the health hazards from medical journals. Everyone knows that there is a problem, but still there is not enough action to change things. We get a very high burst frequency. Imagine we switch the supply on and off every day, so we damage the pipes ourselves. Consequently, we have a high level of leakage. If we have a high level of leakage, we get even more intermittent supply because we don't have enough water anymore. We have low pressures. And at the end of the day, we also have high coping costs for the consumers because they have to store water. I did, together with an American colleague of mine, we did estimates about the global levels of non-revenue water. And we got a shocking number. 126 billion cubic meters per year are lost. This is 346 million cubic meters per day, or 77 liters per capita per day, on average, all over the world. Here you have the different world regions, and you see that Latin America and the Caribbean is amongst the regions in the world with the highest levels of NRW. I've now analyzed the Caribbean data separately, and we get an average level of 140 liters per capita per day, non-revenue water. So this is more than the per capita consumption in many, many countries, in many systems. There is nearly no other region in the world that has such high NRW levels. We have to make things even more crazy. We have such expensive water because our next possible water source is desalination. In many countries, it's already now desalination, and still we are losing 30, 40, 50% of this expensive water. So what are the main reasons for a high NRW? We have a lack of incentives on all levels. We have a lack of management focus. It's just not a priority. Nobody takes it seriously. People do not understand the issues sufficiently, and staff is not qualified enough and is not trained well. Nobody likes to invest in NRW reduction. If you are a politician, you want to invest in a new treatment plant, you can cut the red ribbon and this is nice. But who is interested to repair hundreds and thousands of leaks? Therefore, we have very insufficient CapEx and OpEx budget. We have poor construction standards, poor construction quality. We don't do active leakage control. We just believe that the leaks will come to the surface and then we will repair them. And everyone underestimates how complex NRW management is. It is not so easy anymore. You need to know a lot to be successful. We need to take action now, because now is the time. After this corona crisis, we need to prepare ourselves. We need to make our utilities more efficient. Every water utility needs to get a water audit done. We need to have a water balance. We need to have water loss performance indicators. And we need to have a cause analysis. What is the reason that our NRW is so high? Is it the leakage? Is it the metering? Is it the illegal consumption? We need to find out. We need to do target setting for the reduction of commercial and physical losses. We need to develop the NRW management strategy, do cost estimates, and then we need to determine how to finance it and how to implement such a project. In a few years, everyone in the Caribbean could be at a very acceptable NRW level if we start. And there would be no risk of intermittent supply anymore. So if you look at the water balance, we have non-revenue water, which has two main parts, which is commercial losses and physical losses. And we need to quantify these parts. We need to quantify the volume of physical losses. We need to quantify the volume of commercial losses. We need to forecast the potential NRW reduction. That's a little case study here where you have at the moment a system input volume of 460,000 cubic meters a day with 40% NRW and a supply time of only 16 hours because you simply don't have more water available. If you do a project, you can say, okay, if the target is only to have 24 hours supply, you will need to get down with your NRW to a level of maybe 28%. And then you can already supply 24 hours. But if for some reason you want to go further down and you set yourself a target, I want to be below 15%. Well, this is also possible. It may just take longer and it will be more expensive. So you need to find the right approach for your situation. The importance of proper forecasting. We need baseline data. It is just not enough if we say we have 50% NRW. We need to understand more. We need to always forecast physical and commercial loss reductions separately. They have nothing to do with each other. We need to take the changes of pressure and supply time into account because they very strongly influence our leakage levels. And to have realistic targets, this is very important to get financing, to get political support. We need to know what we are talking about. Now, how do we implement this? And many utilities in the Caribbean and in many other parts of the world simply do not have enough capacity to implement NRW project. So one option is to outsource. So the first thing could be that time is the issue. There is a lot of pressure, political pressure, regulatory pressure, or now the pressure that there might be a next crisis, the next drought. So we need to do something fast. Limited in-house experience, as we have said already. Limited capacity. Is it possible for a public utility to hire so much additional staff, which you only need for a few years, what to do later? The performance risk. You would like to share this performance risk with somebody else. You don't want to have it yourself. And last but not least, financing. And this is becoming as we have all heard already, more and more of an issue. I completely agree with the last presentation. I had a friend at the European Investment Bank. He told me, there is no lack of money. There is a lack of good projects. So let's prepare good projects. If we outsource NRW reduction, I've prepared here this little chart to explain. We have the performance risk for the utility and the implementation speed. Now here you have a classic consulting contract. All the risk is with the utility and the implementation will be slow. Then you have an advisory performance contract, which is a little bit better. But then you have something really good. And this is a turnkey contract, where you leave the complete NRW reduction to a specialized contractor. One example for this is MIA's highly successful project on New Providence Island in the Bahamas. And then there is also a kind of a strange animal, which is a project in Jamaica, in Kingston, Jamaica, where it's a co-management approach, where the private sector has to work with the staff of the utility. This, as you can imagine, is not always easy, and you have to deal with the unions, and you have to deal with the work ethics, and so it's a possible approach, but definitely a turnkey contract is a better thing. What are the 9 steps to a successful NRW performance-based contract? So first, the water audit, or we also call it rapid NRW assessment. We need to determine the project area if it's not the whole system, if it's not the whole utility. The scope of work, are we talking about leakage reduction? Are we talking about the reduction of commercial losses, or are we talking about NRW reduction at large? We need to select the implementation model, prepare our forecasts. We need to value physical and commercial losses properly. So we need to understand the economics of everything. We need realistic cost estimates. NRW reduction does not come for free. There is a lot of upfront funding always required. And now I'm at the end here. If you look at this very old cartoon from the World Bank, where only the T-boy knows what to do. And this slide is very, very applicable for the situation in the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. Very intuitive. Common sense. I want to thank everyone who I shared it this morning. Let me just go over once again the questions, the procedure for asking questions. We have through YouTube. For those that are watching COVID-19, slido.sli.do. Somebody has WhatsApped me already from CWB, said they have sent their questions there. Hashtag COVID-19 Caribbean Water. That the hashtag there is COVID-19 Caribbean Water. And Twitter as well, accepting questions, hashtag COVID-19 Caribbean Water. So just waiting here now for the questions. I want to thank everybody while I have that time to. Here we go. Question to everybody. This is Ignatius Jean from Kawasa, a good friend Ignatia. He's the executive director of Kawasa. And he asked the question, would governments consider allowing utilities to delay remittance of VAT, value-added tax, to augment utility cash flows in lieu of revenue shortfalls? So anybody can answer that. Would governments consider allowing utilities to delay remittance of the VAT tax to augment utility cash flows in lieu of revenue shortfalls? See, Chris is laughing.
Let me, I don't think any of us on this panel are ministers of government, and my competent ED in his former life has more experience than all of us in that respect. But what I have heard, certainly the government of Grenada point out is, VAT is a major part of the government's revenue. So at this time, government's expenditure has significantly increased. So if you take out their revenue source, where are they going to get the money from to do the kind of broad social programs that are being looked at? So I am sure this is a request that governments across the region are getting. And I suspect it is a discussion that certainly will be tabled, or if it has not been tabled at CARICOM. But VAT has the regional islands that have implemented VAT is a substantial part of the government revenue. So in the absence of serious international support, I am quite sure the governments are going to be hard pressed to do that.
Thank you, Chris. But before you go, I have another question for you. You mentioned utilities should facilitate more processes online. To what extent are utilities in the Caribbean ready to implement digital processes?
Well, some islands are more advanced than others, of course, right? So it's a bit of a mixed bag. Based on my discussions over the last year or two, I think everyone is on the same page in strategically the way you roll it out, the timing with which you roll it out, and how in some cases the IT components are packaged as part of a larger project, which also influences the timing of it. So I think everyone is heading in that direction, but persons are at different phases. I can tell you from a Grenada context, we are actually in the process of redoing our entire IT infrastructure. So this has caught us, I'm going to say, in the middle of it. We're trying to get a new CIS that's speaks to better speaks to your billing system, your asset management, your SCADA, your meter interface, etc. Part of the challenges that we've all faced, you have different IT outfits, you have different packages, and many times you have issues with harmonization of these different packages. Some company, your company that may be doing your accounting package has gone out of business, and then you have to get an accounting package that can work with your customer information package. So it's one of the things that I know we've all grappled with. Many of us use different packages, different systems, which is another whole other conversation. But I think there's certainly even before COVID would be a bit of a further catalyst. But I think even before COVID, most of the islands were already en route to increasing that kind of online communication, online facility, websites, functionality of the website, bearing in mind the whole concept of security, which is a major one. The more you open up your database to the outside world, is the more you open it up to being hacked and hit. And so security has been a major consideration and has to be treated very carefully the more we open.
Thank you, Chris. That's some very good points, because my previous employer had to shut down all offsite access to emails because somebody went in there and started making up fake emails and fake Facebook and having everything go crazy. So it is important. I mean, I know that they're looking, many of the utilities as well, from a previous forum, they have you have the ability of pay your bill to pay your bills in in the banks, in the grocery stores, and other places that you would normally go anyway during maybe a lockdown. So it's important for the utilities to try to make it as easy as possible to receive the money. So I know they're working steadily on that. Things like the call centers, you can outsource a call center. People can receive calls from home, and troubleshoot take complaints from the customers. So all kind of they're looking into different aspects of that, because, as I say, some of these disasters look the same, and you end up having to use the same strategies. Would anybody else like to comment on that? We do have some other questions coming in as well.
I would like to add one comment with regard to this digital process and access. I think that for sure, this situation will be an accelerator. I think that what is going on in Grenada, for example, that is in progress, is probably true for most utilities in the region. I think this will be an accelerator because of the understanding of the importance of this issue. But what I would like to encourage everyone to think about is how better customer service and digital customer service also helps the utility in two ways. One, financially. So it's not only collection, it's the better service that we will give the customers, the more willing they will be to pay. And this also goes down to operations, because naturally there is much more, people are more reluctant to pay for a service that they perceive as a low-level service. So for example, people that suffer from cuts, etc., they don't understand the whole complexity of the system. They don't understand that comes from years of issues, etc. They don't get that. So the thing is that what I want to say about that is that we need to try to take the digital transformation also as a way to increase our efficiency and a way to generate more cash for the utility, while improving the perceived value of the product that we're giving to the people, which I think is very good and very high level in most cases. But people don't see that. They see the problems with the invoice. They see the line to pay. They see the trouble that they had yesterday. They don't understand the amount of effort. And this is something that we can, I think, take a chance to improve now, and also look of how to make a benefit from this for a long-term benefit generation, financially and operationally. So I really hope this trend will move.
Thanks, Noel. And I have another question in that category, but I just want to let you know that we're at 4 million in Twitter. That's pretty impressive. A question for Aranzazu of Alma. What percentage of fall in the water market do you estimate in 2020? Tough question. When do you think the 2019 figures will recover?
It's difficult to say. It's very difficult to say. And today, even now, we are in the middle of the crisis. So we cannot know when the situation will be recovered. For the municipal sector, the water revenues will be the same. The problem is mainly for the tourism and the industry that depends in these third parties. From a company point of view, we are thinking a situation that this crisis will take over 1 year and a half, to be able to recover 2019 figures, mainly due to the tourism and to the possibility to travel again and to recover 100% the industry. That is the worst case scenario we are planning in our minds for the water revenues. Of course, the projects will need to be up sooner, and the new infrastructure need to be built. But thinking of that, we'll say that in a year, we shall be able to see the figures we expected. But please don't take my word as nothing.
No, okay. No, that's fine. It's fair. Thank you. Thank you. Another question. This is to Norm. If I wanted to start thinking out of the box, do I look at PPP PBC or concession? What gives me the best returns and why?
Okay. So first of all, I think they are all, I would say all of them are relatives, okay? Well, let's start with what is a PPP. It is just is a way to deploy private money into public work, okay? That can be done in a concession or in a performance-based contract way. I personally think that most islands and systems in the Caribbean, and this is my personal perception and my knowledge, are not going to benefit hugely from a full privatization of their systems. I do think that still, and contrary to other parts of the world, like Europe, a full privatization is not needed in the Caribbean. So I will go, and I think that what will work best for the Caribbean is what I will call performance-based contract, long-term performance-based contracts that include components that ensure banks or investors that they can recover the return, but we will still keep the national water companies in that country in governmental hands. I think that it's absolutely appropriate that they will continue to manage that source on a national level. But I do believe strongly that things can be improved and money can be very, relatively easily obtained at this time to do that. So in general, globally, I don't think there's a global answer. I think that the right answer is each system has its own features, has its own unique features, and then you need to make your solution. So I would say if most of the Caribbean islands, they need to look at something that is less than a full privatization concession and much more than a simple service contract. They need to build something in the middle that is suitable for these economies under these conditions. And the results that they will get are quite immediate. I can tell you that if you look at the analysis of the IRR, the return that some of our clients have on the projects, you're talking about unimaginable numbers. Because when you start from a very difficult position, you can improve quite fast. And what we cannot forget is that if we have long-term contracts, not only that we can finance them, we can make sure that the results are maintained, which is something that is key. Because you can do a wonderful job for 5 years, but if we didn't train, for example, the employees, the managers, we didn't put the systems in place, and we didn't ensure that we have an obligation as a private sector to maintain your results for the long term, supporting you, then we will disappear, and who knows how it will function in the next phase. So we need to put that in a way that motivates the private sector to give the public sector long-term results. And I think that is the key to a long answer to a short question, but I see that as the key for the Caribbean region, essentially.
Thank you, Noam. Well, we're almost at 12. I want to hear from Roland. Roland, we have a question. Somebody says, I've done a little in the past. I imagine that is with respect to NRW. Where do I start, and what is needed for me to start looking at my system effectively?
Well, the first step is always to do a water audit and to try to build a water balance, judge the accuracy of the water balance, and calculate the water loss performance indicators. This must always be the starting point. And then it depends. Do we need more water? Then the reduction of physical losses is the most urgent thing. But do we need more revenues? So we need to look to do something about the commercial losses. But again, all of these can only be discussed once we have done the water audit.
Okay, great. Thank you, Roland. Just a couple more questions before we end here. What utility processes have been identified or is being considered in using technology to encourage less public interaction and more remote functions? That I could leave that one open. I know, Chris, you answered a little bit of that, but what utility processes have been identified or being considered in using technology to encourage less public interaction and more remote functions?
So I think that Chris probably agree with me. I think anyone that is in the industry knows that the actual physical works is still a plumbing job that you need to do on the ground. That's not going to change probably, I don't know, until robots replace us. Everything that has to do with metering in the commercial process can be done remotely. It's a matter of cost and benefit that we need to analyze per utility, but that whole cycle actually does not require any physical presence of anybody anymore, at least from a technological perspective. You need to find the economical justifications to do that, which I think in some cases are clear, in some cases are much less clear. But all that aspect can be actually, let's say, dealt with remotely. We can get to that technologically very, very fast.
Okay, great. And coming to the end here, to anyone who wants to answer this question, a lot of this is high in our minds. Do you think the pandemic will affect funding sources for, or should I say, how would you think the pandemic will affect funding sources for water projects in Caribbean countries? And if possible, to what extent? Anybody can jump in here.
Well, if I
sorry, Stuart, go ahead.
Yes.
If I can just follow up on the previous question about what we're going to do about technology. As Roland suggested, that we have to start off with the water balance and get all our KPIs worked out, which cannot be done remotely. That has to be done with hard people on the ground working. To follow up on that, the technologies we have for meter reading, for leak detection, for pressure and flow management, everything else can come through the internet through some sort of cloud-based software. So that's okay, but this does not affect. We have to start with as Roland said, getting the pure basics out there. And this information will only report to us the information that's going in the field. It won't necessarily reduce the losses or reduce the situation. So although technology is there is always got to be some sort of significant human impact to go out to do the work as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Stuart. Anybody else want to weigh in on that? Okay. One of the questions here, and I feel it in Trinidad and Tobago, how will the drop in the price of oil affect the operating costs of water services? I know since oil price dropped, we're all wondering what's going on. And so we don't have the drop in the tourism like many of the other islands are, but that drop in oil prices is trouble. So anyone can speak on how will the drop in oil price of oil affect the operating costs of water services?
Well, generally it's favorable for water utilities, especially those that are more energy intensive, do more desal, do more pumping, etc. Because you're certainly going to expect a corresponding drop in electricity costs. I think I touched on that in my presentation, saying this at least is one little bright spark for us that are net importers of energy. At least we have one little area that at this point in time is giving us a little reprieve.
Okay. Anybody else would like to weigh in on that?
No, just to say that probably it will have an impact in the short term because the energy price will be down, but it will be just in the short term. I cannot think that will make desalination more valuable on the long term because for sure the prices will recover in some months.
Okay.
By the way, just to answer Wayne to the financing point, and I think also Arantxa talked about it in her conversation. I think, you know, from the aspect of both of us, we develop business around the world that actually requires a lot of capital, maybe in different angles, but I think very complementary ones. And we do see the same trend. If I have to gamble, I would say the following: very short term, there will be less money. Okay, and when I say very short term, 3, 4, 5 months, maybe you'll see less money. Beyond that, I think in the longer, if we are looking in the, let's say, 1 to 3 years bracket, there is a window of opportunity to finance these projects. I think in the Caribbean specifically, you have great partners, you have great IFIs, but you can also attract private capital to that endeavor. Arantxa, I don't know if you agree, but I think this is
absolutely. Yeah, I was going to say that before, that even in the short term, I think the DFAs are going to support the region and the multilateral agencies. Is going to be money put there to support the water infrastructure because it's critical. And our feeling is that even the private money, the capital market, the investors are eager to invest and to find the right projects. So more than the liquidity and the availability of the money, I will put the pressure in the availability to have those projects in the right scheme, with the right framework, and with the willingness of the government. So if the public sector works perfectly and it's able to put together those projects, the funds will be available for sure.
That sounds good. That sounds good. I like the enthusiasm.
Is what we have.
Yeah, I mean, if people are looking, they have money and they need to spend it. Come to the Caribbean. We'll help you do that. And of course, you know, I know that you all will work with us to, you know, get the right policies, the right framework to be able to make it a win-win situation. Well, I think we have gotten to where we want to go. Our set time was noon, and our time over here at 12, and we've gone there. We've been successful. We have a lot of questions. I'm still amazed that we are over 4 million on Twitter. That's great. That means that people are interested, and that is a good thing. So I want to thank everybody for coming here today, for speaking. The presentations were excellent. The questions were excellent too. You had our panelists thinking deeply on the responses. So I wanted to thank everybody for connecting on behalf of Mia Water and Alma Water, and of course IAGWA and the Smart Water Magazine. We want to thank everybody for contributing to this. And the presentation, the webinar will be available online. It'll be in Smart Water Magazine and IAGWA or IAGWA, if possible. So you will learn about that, but keep in contact with Smart Water Magazine, and you'll be able to get a copy of the webinar. So without any further ado, I want to thank everybody for coming, and keep your eye out for some more webinars on these very interesting topics. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.